What if I told you that the person you are today is not the person you have to be tomorrow? And I don't mean that metaphorically. I mean it physically, down to the very structure and wiring of your brain. Most of us live with a quiet belief that our brain is something fixed, like a piece of pre-installed computer hardware. We have our habits, our fears, our automatic reactions, and we think this is just who I am. We try to change, we use willpower to fight against them, but eventually we find ourselves back in the same familiar loop. It feels exhausting and disempowering. But what if that core belief is wrong? What if your brain isn't a block of marble that has already been sculpted, but a flowing river, constantly ready to be reshaped? In this video, we are going to explore one of the most incredible scientific discoveries about what it means to be human: neuroplasticity. And more importantly, I'm going to give you a blueprint, a completely new way of seeing yourself, not as someone trying to fix your brain, but as someone who can cultivate it. Prepare to meet the person you never knew you could become, a neural gardener.
For centuries, we were stuck in an old paradigm, the fixed brain paradigm. Science once believed that after a certain age, our brains were essentially unchangeable. The neural connections formed in childhood would define us forever. This was an incredibly limiting idea. It implied that you were stuck with your trauma, your bad habits, and your limitations. But modern science has completely shattered that paradigm. It introduced a new, profoundly hopeful one, the plastic brain paradigm. And to truly understand its power, we need a new metaphor. Stop thinking of your brain as a computer. Start picturing it as a living garden. This is our sticky concept, the neural gardener. In this garden, every thought, every emotion, and every action you take is like a seed being planted. The thoughts and actions you repeat form pathways in the garden. At first, they are just small trails, but the more you walk them, the deeper and wider they become, like neural highways. This is why habits, good or bad, are so hard to change. They are the most well-traveled roads in your garden. The old paradigm told you to use brute force willpower to destroy those highways. But a wise gardener doesn't do that. They don't fight the garden. Instead, they begin to cultivate new pathways. They plant new seeds, water them every day, and slowly, new, vibrant paths full of life begin to form. At the same time, the old paths, from lack of use, become overgrown with weeds and, eventually, disappear. This isn't wishful positive thinking. This is biology. It's called neuroplasticity, and it's the key to reclaiming control over your life. In a moment, we'll break down exactly how it works and how you can begin your gardening work today.
So what exactly is neuroplasticity? Simply put, it is the brain's ability to reorganize itself by forming new neural connections throughout life. Neuro refers to neurons, the nerve cells that are the building blocks of the brain, and plasticity means the quality of being changeable. Your brain is changeable. This concept has revolutionized our understanding of the brain. It was once thought that only the brains of children were plastic, but we now know that the adult brain is constantly changing in response to experience. Every time you learn a new skill, form a new memory, or even change a pattern of thought, you are physically changing the structure of your brain. You are literally making new connections and strengthening existing ones.
The mechanism works on a famous principle in neuroscience. Neurons that fire together, wire together. Let's go back to our garden. Every time you have a thought or perform an action, a specific chain of neurons fires. It's like an electrical current running through a circuit. If you repeat that thought or action, that current runs through the same circuit again and again. Each time it does, the connection between those neurons gets stronger, more efficient. The myelin sheath around the axons thickens, which helps the signal travel faster. The dirt path in your garden has now been paved. For example, If you have a habit of worrying about the future, every instance of worry is a moment where you fire and wire the neurons in your anxiety circuit. Over time, your brain gets incredibly efficient at worrying. It becomes the default response. Conversely, there's also a process called synaptic pruning. Neural connections that are not used frequently become weak and are eventually eliminated. The old paths that go unwalked will disappear. This means you can actively weaken old habits by simply stopping walking that path and starting to build a new one.
Now, you might be thinking, this sounds great, but isn't it just another way of saying think positive? The answer is no. Pure positive thinking is often an attempt to paint over a negative emotion with a coat of pink paint. Neuroplasticity is far deeper. It's not just about thinking, it's about focused attention and action. You don't just tell the garden, be beautiful. You actively roll up your sleeves, pull the weeds, plant new seeds, and water them daily. It's the difference between wishing for and gardening. Another point of skepticism. Doesn't this take years? It's true that major changes take time. You can't grow an oak tree overnight, but micro changes in your brain are happening every single day. Every time you choose a new response over an old one, you are performing an act of neural gardening. Consistency is more important than intensity. 10 minutes a day of cultivating a new habit is far more effective than trying to do it for 7 hours on a Sunday and then giving up.
So what? What does this mean for your real life? Let's consider the story of Sarah. Sarah is a talented graphic designer, but she struggles with crippling imposter syndrome and perfectionism. Every time she starts a new project, a superhighway of self-doubt fires in her brain. I'm not good enough. They're gonna find out I'm a fraud. This has to be perfect or I will fail. These thoughts are not just ideas. They are neural circuits reinforced by thousands of repetitions. The consequence? Sarah procrastinates. She spends hours tweaking tiny details no one will notice. She turns down big opportunities because she's afraid she can't meet her own impossible standards. Her neural garden is dominated by the ivy of fear, choking out the flowers of creativity. She is stuck. Sarah's story shows the stakes of letting our old pathways run the show. But it's also the starting point for change. Because once you realize these pathways are not you, they're just connections that can be changed, you have taken your power back. You can start designing a new garden. But how? That is the subject of our next section, the detailed blueprint for becoming a neural gardener.
Welcome to the Gardener's Workshop. This process is not a quick fix. It's an art, a practice. We'll break it down into 3 stages, continuing with Sarah's story. Before planting anything new, a good gardener understands their land. You have to know what kind of soil you have, what weeds are growing, and where the sun hits best. This is your first action. Map your garden. For the next 3 days, take a notebook and create 2 columns. On the left, write automatic action. On the right, write the fuel source. Every time you notice yourself engaging in a habitual behavior you want to change, be it mindless scrolling, self-criticism, or procrastination, write it in the action column. Then pause and ask yourself, what fuel is driving this? Is it fear, of failure, of judgment, or is it purpose, a desire to grow, to connect? Sarah did this exercise. She realized her action of procrastinating was almost always fueled by fear, the fear that her work wouldn't be perfect. This diagnosis isn't for judgment, it's for data collection. For the first time, she could clearly see the old, worn path in her garden. When you first become aware of old patterns, It can feel anxious or overwhelming. This is normal. Your nervous system is on alert. So before we build the new, we need a tool to calm the old. Think of it as a circuit breaker. The most powerful and rapid tool for this is the physiological sigh. This is a technique developed by neuroscientists at Stanford. It works like this. Take a deep inhale through your nose, and then when your lungs are full, take another short, sharp inhale to fully inflate the tiny air sacs in your lungs. Then, execute a long, slow exhale through your mouth. Just one or two of these can instantly calm your sympathetic nervous system, the fight or flight response, and activate the parasympathetic nervous system, the rest and digest response. When Sarah felt the wave of perfectionism and anxiety rising, instead of diving into the procrastination loop, she would pause. She would take 2 physiological sighs. The storm inside her didn't vanish, but it calmed. She created a tiny space between the trigger and the reaction. That space is where the real gardening begins.
Now that the garden is stabilized, it's time to plant new seeds. We are going to focus on replacing 2 core components, the cognitive filter and the power source. First, let's upgrade Sarah's perfectionism filter. It's a filter that only allows perfect to pass through, and everything else gets stuck. This is unrealistic and paralyzing. We're replacing it with the 85% filter. The rule is simple. Instead of aiming for 100%, you intentionally aim for 85%. 85% is excellent. It allows for completion, it allows for fixable mistakes, and most importantly, it keeps you moving. Every time Sarah started a project, she told herself, "My goal is 85%. This was a new seed of thought. It felt foreign at first, but every time she repeated it and acted on it, this new neural path was watered and grew stronger. Second, we changed the power source. Sarah's old power source was achievement, external validation. This is a volatile fuel. We're replacing it with a more stable internal power source, core values. Sarah identified her core values as creativity and helping others. Now, when working, instead of asking, "Will people like this?" she asks, "Does this express my creativity? Does this help my client?" By changing the question, she changed the entire fuel source for her actions. She was no longer working from a place of fear, but from a place of purpose. This new path wasn't just more effective, it was more joyful.
Sarah's journey was not an overnight transformation. She still has days where she doubts herself. But the difference is that she is no longer a victim of her garden. She is the gardener. She has the map, she has the tools to stabilize her system, and she knows how to plant new seeds. The old highway of fear is still there, but it's beginning to fade. And right alongside it, a new, vibrant path of purpose-driven creativity is becoming clearer every day. This is the promise of neuroplasticity. It does not promise a life without challenges. It offers you a far more precious gift, empowered hope. The hope that you are not defined by your past, and the power to actively shape your brain and your future. You are not a fixed machine. You are a garden of possibility. And your gardening starts today. The first step isn't a grand gesture, but a simple question. Look at your own mental garden right now. What is the one overgrown path that holds you back the most? And more importantly, what is the one new seed, one new thought, one small action that you will begin to cultivate starting today? Share that first seed in the comments below. By writing it down, you are planting it in this fertile ground. And together, as a community of gardeners, we will grow. Thank you for walking through this blueprint with me.